So my thought process is I have to do this separate from the system for it to have any sort of credibility, okay? Now, if it's too harsh for some people, well, maybe you got to work on your courage.
Welcome back to this week's episode of The Feds, where information meets action. I am Stephanie Weidel, host and director. Please share and like our episodes and find us on social media on X, Facebook, and Instagram. Visit our website at fedsforfreedom.org, where you can find more information about Feds for Freedom.
Welcome to The Feds, insiders bringing accountability, integrity, and reform to a broken bureaucracy. At Feds for Freedom, we value constructive dissent and healthy debate. The views and opinions shared in today's episode are those of the speaker alone and do not express the views or opinions of the U.S. government or any other employer.
Today, we get to speak with a veteran and self-proclaimed deep state marauder, Ivan Raiklin. Ivan, it's great to see you today.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, self-proclaimed. I think you quoted the Washington Compost just up the road there across the river in D.C. That's what they called me, or said that I said.
Well, we're going to have you explain why you say that. But first, tell us your background. Who are you?
So a little bit about my background professionally is that I spent the last quarter of a century up until about the middle of 2022 in the national security ecosystem as a intelligence officer, as a Green Beret military attaché, and I also, I guess, I was a contractor, and then primarily I was in active guard or reserve status over the course of those 25 years. I culminated with a position at the Defense Intelligence Agency as a contractor, where I taught intelligence analysis, teaching others how to become professional intelligence analysts, as well as intel support to multinational operations, as well as, let's see here, the National Intelligence Course, which gives an overview, a broad and detailed overview of what our entire national security structure looks like. All the different agencies, elements within the U.S. government, the 18 members of the intel community, and so on and so forth. So a little bit of detail. And then in the reserves, I culminated before I retired as a technology scout in Silicon Valley, in the San Francisco and greater Bay Area, where we were out there to essentially communicate with the industry to see if they wanted to provide or have access to the Army procurement cycle to offer up their product or service in artificial intelligence, mixed reality, and gaming to improve our national security posture, particularly within the Army. So those are the two kind of culminating points of my DoD career, if you will, whether it was at DIA or whether it was as a scout there. So I have a broad, I guess, background in understanding not only what's currently going on with technology in those spheres, but also having the ability, I guess, to have a critical eye on looking at problems. And so with that backdrop, in addition to that, I picked up a law degree along the way, I've done some work in national security law, constitutional law, mostly advisory work. And that put together really, I guess, gives me a broad perspective to address certain issues that I've recognized take place in our country over the course of the last several years, where I just didn't believe the hype that was being pushed by our biggest information purveyors, which I now will confidently say are biggest disinformation purveyors within the media landscape, whether it's the legacy media, the big tech, again, factoring in my background, knowing people, communicating with folks. And so I took it upon myself to start to do some more detailed analysis of, answering some of the questions of what's going on with all of this. We went from I call them religions, and it was done in such synchronized fashion. We started off with a I believe it was the BLM religion, and then we went to the COVID religion, and then we moved on to the Ukraine religion, and then the Israel religion, and then we went to, I think this last week, we moved on to Project 2025 religion. So I always have the question of who and why. Like, why is this occurring and who's pushing for it? And as you scratch the surface, some of the same players that are involved in the censorship scheme, that are involved in silencing critical thought. And so I took it upon myself to start to expose all the individuals in the areas that I felt that something was not naturally occurring. It wasn't organic. It wasn't endemic to national discourse. And so I started to identify a grouping of folks that were behind it. And it all leads back to the time frame of around 2014, about 10 years ago. And most people call it the proverbial deep state. I can probably name you the individual, the section, the division, the agency, the department of the U.S. government that is behind all the problems we've seen over the last several years.
And that's why
that's why the term deep state, and that's why the term marauder, because let's face it, in my vision of what marauder is, it is a pirate that goes onto a ship and loots it for its booty, right? Its treasure. Well, when you put those two terms together, I define deep state marauder as an individual that is trying to reclaim what was stolen in the constitutional sense. So the deep state has stolen our individual rights, have violated and trampled on those rights. The First Amendment through the censorship industrial complex, the Fourth Amendment through the placement of folks on the Quiet Skies program where they get no due process, so Fifth Amendment violated, and they go through what I consider a Fourth Amendment rape proceeding as they enter the airport to conduct normal commercial air travel. So first, Fourth Amendment, the millions of illegal queries by the Department of Justice and the FBI individuals that because they can, with no consequence, with impunity, search and spy on American citizens through the FISA capability within that organization. Your 10th Amendment violations of states' rights and sovereignty going on nonstop. So when I say deep state marauder, and this may be the debut podcast I've done where I kind of give you what my understanding of what the self-proclaimed deep state marauder, what it means to me is I am basically taking it upon myself, with or without anybody's help, in exposing all of the scum within the deep state, right? By name, date, place, and transgression, and then providing my analysis of how they were involved in the violation of our rights. And that's the marauding part is I'm trying to expose them so that we can then regain what they took from us. Mm-hmm. That's it.
I want to go back. Would you give us a clear definition of what deep state is? And does it also include the establishment? Is that the same term?
Well,
one sentence.
For me, I don't know what it is for others, but for me, the deep state it's the catch-all phrase of those government, former and current officials, and in the periphery that they communicate, that are organized in order to destroy our constitutional order and violate citizens' rights in some way, shape, or form. And primarily, the focus for me is those that commit blatant treason and violence against its citizens. I'll give some examples. So most people are still not aware 3.5 years in that, and I got to say this, I am against all forms of political violence. But guess what? The way that I can expose the political violence that's being done against us by this lawless, belligerent, illegitimate executive branch, as well as the legislative branch of the 117th Congress that committed blatant act of violence. The only way that I've identified that I can get beyond the censorship to expose them for what they did in their political violence is to explain that, hey, if you're all about equal justice, why don't we go ahead and expose that by saying, terms like live stream swatting raids. It catches people's attention, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Well, when they say, oh, Ivan's advocating for that, well, no, I'm advocating for exposing those that actually did that activity. Let me give some examples. Michael Byrd, U.S. Capitol Police officer. What did he do? He shot and killed an unarmed, peaceful trespasser into the Capitol, slaughtered her. Her name was Ashley Babbitt. That was a U.S. Capitol Police officer that worked at the behest of who? The Capitol Police Board, which was Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, and the Senate Majority Leader at the time, Mitch McConnell. Those are the Praetorian Guard that protect the Capitol. You think that if you called out your security guard for committing murder, that they would protect you? They would commit mutiny against you. And that's why they're going unchecked. Their lawlessness is unchecked. There's no mechanism in our constitutional order to create consequences for those inside of the law enforcement arm of the U.S. Capitol, because they have dirt on those people they protect that could create those consequences. So then I have to come up with solutions on how do we create necessary exposure at a minimum so that we create the political motivation to change this. Mm-hmm. And I think that hit piece that was done on me today hopefully is the impetus for people to start to wake up that what they're accusing me of, they are actually doing. And that was the goal of my campaign over the last several months, to do two things. One, motivate the left side of the spectrum, radical left media, to go ahead and accuse me of something that they're doing so that I can then reverse it and say, yep, I agree with you. Political violence is not the solution, but you've been doing it day in and day out, starting with forcing people to essentially commit suicide through these forced DNA mutilation products. In the tens of thousands, our U.S. government, when they mandated the clot shot to the DOD, other elements, I mean, after litigation, some of it fell, but in the process, how many people were slaughtered? That's political violence.
Yes.
Because they forced a product against their political enemies, right? Next, I talked about that. That's the executive branch. What else? We talked about how the legislative branch not only murdered Ashley Babbitt, the individual that murdered her was promoted to captain, and he got months of TDY in a hotel for his protection when he was at Andrews Air Force Base. So I read at the officer lodging there. And so this is what political violence looks like. And these thugs go ahead and not only kill First Amendment rally attendees, they also protect the person that does the murdering. That's unacceptable. Next, we have a Metropolitan Police Department officer. According to the video footage, it sure looks like Lila Morris, MPD officer, who's one of Mayor Bowser's henchwomen, also murdered another First Amendment unarmed rally attendee. So they were murdered for a trespass. So you think that's good to conduct political murder against your political opponents? I don't think so. Let's go beyond that. What about the temporary kidnapping of Roger Stone? And it was live streamed, and it was a SWAT exercise, wasn't it? When a few years back, Criminal News Network was the live stream arm of the radical leftist domestic terrorist that went ahead and conducted an armed robbery and live stream swatting raid kidnapping of Roger Stone. Political target? Yeah, that's called political violence, folks. That's what they're doing. Next up, we have Roger Stone is currently kidnapped. Steve Bannon is currently in kidnap status, right? As of July 1st. Who else is kidnapped? Peter Navarro. Heard of these names?
Yes.
These are all political violent actions by what I call at this point, when you look at those examples, I don't think people will disagree with me in saying that, the domestic terrorist organization in America sounds like the FBI, because they're the ones that are conducting these live stream swatting raids. Violent political action. That's what they're doing. So I'm glad people took note that this activity is unacceptable to all of us and it needs to stop. So I agree with Congressman Jamie Raskin that Speaker Mike Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer needs to join me. I'd be happy to go to whoever's office, or they can join me wherever, in calling on the stoppage to cease all political violence and to hold those that conducted that political violence already to account. And that includes the legislative branch actors that I've mentioned so far, as well as all those that promulgated the illegal emergency use authorized product consumption that resulted in the destruction of human beings, families, and killed people.
You're using your expertise to bring tremendous awareness to all of this, the incredible illegal activity that our government is doing. I want to go back and ask, what circumstances gave rise to the deep state? Why do we have it?
Well, I use this simple analogy of, if you are in your vehicle and you know that there will never be a police officer or any law enforcement on the highway upon which you drive, the chances of you breaking the speed limit are very high. And the more you are not held to account for that activity, the more you're going to continue to do it. And you're going to increase your risk level. Well, the more these actors are not only nothing being done, but they're promoted for this illegal behavior, Michael Bird. They're promoted. You think they're going to stop doing this lawless activity? No. When an illegal election is conducted and nothing is done, and you're given an award for it in the White House for participating in the electoral heist, why would you stop what you're doing? It's like, wait, this is great. Let's keep it up, is what they're saying from their perspective.
So let me ask,
let me finish the thought. Everyone know already, I'm just rehashing identifying the problem. I like to create solutions. So when you identify the problem, you need to identify the problem very specifically. And then you have to come up with a solution. So the first phase for the solution is that we have to break through the censorship to expose who is doing what. And when you do that, apparently, as of this morning, with that hit piece on me, they don't like it when I call them out by name.
Well, of course, no one does.
By date and by transgression.
Because that means true accountability to those specific people.
Exactly. And so, because Elon Musk, thankfully, and now we have platforms like Getter, Telegram that we use, Truth Social, Rumble, Gab, Clout Hub, Locals, Substack. We have the ability, and X, we have the ability as independent investigators, call it investigative journalists, call it investigators, or just citizen journalists, citizen reporters. We have the ability to observe, just like anybody from the intelligence community, right? They're there to collect, process, analyze, and disseminate information. Well, when everybody has something like this, which competes with, this has more capability than all of NASA probably 20 years ago. So when everybody has a device that is able to, that they can spy on us through, I get it, which they do, and that we can use to live stream observe lawfully what's going on around us and we start to see transgressions, it is very simple for us to report on it. And so we now are competing with the legacy. And so when you investigate me 20 times or so and you can't find anything, the best option you have is to discredit me, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just like they did in the 60s, whether it was COINTELPRO. And it included, what did Chris Wray's equivalent in the 60s do to his political opponents? Chris Wray being the current director of the FBI. His equivalent back in the day in the 60s, what did he do to Martin Luther King Jr.? What did he do to JFK, Robert F. Kennedy around the time of the convention in California? So I'm trying to stop all this political violence.
It's massive, though. It's so massive. So we're going to get to how we can help as we the people, how we can help bring these people to account. I've wanted to talk with you for a while since I realized who you were after we met in down at Gourmelt's. But even people in the past have said that even these people who say that the deep state is a conspiracy theory, they have got to be asking themselves who is actually running our country after seeing the White House be a certain way and be kind of have a bit of dementia and be
just a bit.
I mean, people have got to be asking themselves what is actually going on, who is pulling the strings. And so I cannot believe that it's just the FBI, as you say, FBI agents on the ground doing this. Who up from them is telling them to do this? Or how have they been brainwashed? Who is the person that needs to be held to account, or the group of people?
Well, I have a grouping of people that I've identified.
And you have that target list. So what does it take to be on that list?
That's a very good question. What does it take to be on that list? Well, I already mentioned a few examples. Actually, good old Jamie Raskin is on that list as well. Even though I agree with, you can be on my list and I can agree with you on certain things. That's the beauty of our First Amendment and our constitutional republic. So the thing that I agree with him on is I disagree that, or I should say, I agree with him that there should not be political violence. Full stop, without equivocation. And with that, I want to hold those to account that committed and conducted that.
Absolutely. Okay? That should be the aim of every American citizen.
So many, or I should say some of the members on that list, most people would agree, have conducted and committed political violence. I think listeners to this show would agree that Anthony Fauci, who Elon Musk, his pronouns are arrest Fauci, right? I wonder why Elon Musk's pronouns are that. Is it because Elon Musk has looked at the direct messages of every person on my list that has a Twitter account to then come to the conclusion of there's sufficient evidence to meet elements of a crime that Elon Musk has observed through his holdings at Twitter now? Direct messages, account status, emails between Twitter employees and Fauci and his offices, right? Internal Slack channel communications. So Anthony Fauci and those that were involved in the whole COVID con. Remember Elon Musk said, Twitter is a crime scene. Well, based on what, Elon? I wonder what it is.
What do you make of him not releasing those final files?
So,
because I see your hashtag all the time. Release the mother of all files.
All Twitter files.
That's right.
So one of the reasons why the attacks and the hit pieces are coming my way is you can determine why they're doing it based on the questions that they ask. So some of the line of questioning, especially the one where Zoe attempted to have a conversation with me and I kind of proceeded to educate her on
Yeah, and we'll include
on
that
life.
video for everyone in the description below. Yes.
But there's just so much to talk about. When I explained to her some of the members that I've kind of monitored and observed, I think the reason why Elon Musk hasn't released them yet, it takes a little bit of time to catch up to what I've already investigated. Granted, you can't just be like, release it. There's certain considerations. He's got shareholders, he's got investors, this and that. He's got to do his own risk analysis and calculus. Now, is it likely that he will just release all the direct messages of all these folks? Maybe he would. Is it more surgical and strategic for him to lean on Matt Taibbi and Michael Schellenberger and say, you know what? Go ahead and take a look now that, thank you, Raw Sewage, and thank you, others out there, Jamie Raskin calling on Speaker Johnson. Because guess what? Now everybody's going to read the article. They're going to look at what I have to say. My name ID is now, like, my voice increases. So thank you for that, Representative Raskin. And so he has to now potentially, not has to, but he may consider now addressing it because it's gotten to a higher level of national discourse. So then it comes to the decision point. If I'm in his shoes, this is probably what I would do. And I don't know everything he knows, right? It would be, how would releasing and exposing all the massive corruption that Ivan Raiklin has alleged through the people that he has mentioned, how would it benefit Elon Musk's mission for the First Amendment, which he's publicly stated with Twitter, with his other business holdings, X, was it the solar company, his Neuralink, like all these different companies. And I suspect that it would benefit him to do this sort of release in a more surgical, strategic manner where it showcases only the treasonous activity that all the conspiracy theorists have alleged, where he can now disclose it to show that all these conspiracy theorists were actually conspiracy oracles, critical thinkers. They already read and had sufficient evidence for themselves to come to the conclusion that this is a actual seditious conspiracy. But the problem with that is that the richest man in the world is up against the most powerful grouping of people running the most powerful country-ish. I mean, it's arguable now where we're at as it relates to China, unfortunately. That's a whole separate subject, and how much influence they play in this conversation through their leverage, economic leverage and capture of the White House. But yeah.
Actually, that's something I wanted to talk about. Franklin D. Roosevelt. It's interesting. The Roosevelts had a lot to say about this invisible government. But Franklin D. Roosevelt said, the real truth of the matter is, as you and I know, that a financial element in the larger centers has owned the government ever since the days of Andrew Jackson. So what do you make of that? How far back in history does the deep state go? I mean, Andrew Jackson's, that's 1800s. So have we been living with this veil of a invisible government, as Teddy Roosevelt says, another quote, this invisible government behind the scene government for some time?
So that's a longer answer to your question, but I'm going to just give a brief overview. People need to remember that the political party system as it stands today, by its name and I guess registration, if you will, goes back to the 1830s with the Democrat Party and the 1850s with the Republican Party. So since the 1850s, 99% of political power and thus governmental functionaries that fall within the constitutional construct, as laid out by the 7 articles and 27 amendments, have rested with those two political parties, right? And so they've built their power off of that infrastructure. And when you control the information that gets to the we the people, right, part of the Constitution, you get to pretty much dictate on what's truth and what's not, right? Because you just frame it how you want to. But when that is challenged by those not in the system, that's where you are able to expose some of this and start to create some autocorrect mechanisms against the lawlessness.
Mm-hmm.
Again, I mean, in the 1960s, I always got to use that example. With Martin Luther King Jr., I would say that he was a political movement in and of himself with what he had created outside of the two political party structure, right? More or less. And so it was a challenge to that deep state, right? You got to remember that J. Edgar Hoover was in power for almost 50 years. Who else has been in power for 50 years today in today's climate? For over 50 now. The failed vice president, the former failed senator from Delaware, right? The current Chinese Communist Party ambassador to the U.S. I'm talking about Joe Biden, okay? So when you are in a position of influence and power for generations, it becomes an incestual generational rot that you promote. And so that, I mean, we're talking executive branch, his relationship with, being a former senator. There's a lot of dirt that people know about each other, and they leverage that. So the deep state is kind of it's a leverage game. The more and more again, as an outsider looking in, it's like, whoa. And a lot of you people don't want to be associated with me because I call them all out from left to right.
Now, we're looking at this from a political perspective, but what about an economical perspective? How do the bankers play a role?
Yeah. So that part of the discussion, I will be the first to say I am not the subject matter expert to give you a full, deep analysis on who those players are, okay? Money drives a lot of decisions. And so do you have something that I can write on to really make my point? When they were telling us to follow the science, what I like to call it is this, and give me a moment as I write this. The S. Spelled this way. The C in science should be spelled with the cent sign. The I would be the yen, right? The E would be a euro. The N, I don't know if there's a currency with the N. So then we go with C and E. So following the science really comes down to following the money. And that's how it should be spelled. Does that kind of make the point?
That does.
When we're talking about the whole COVID con and the pandemic. Of which Jamie Raskin just gloriously, up until a few months ago, was wearing his, beloved bandana and his face toilet. He should have been wearing too when he was standing next to me.
So, okay, well, I have a question. Is the transgender agenda
the self-mutilation agenda? Yep. What's that?
Is that a deep state thing? Or
so you're asking me,
so how do you know?
Is the self-mutilation agenda?
Yep. Is that something brought into the picture by the deep state to undermine the foundation of being a human?
So here's my hypothesis, okay?
And basically my question is, how do you know if it's a deep state or if it's something else? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Well, there have been a lot of hypotheses that have thrown out there. It starts to incorporate China, CCP, right? Xi, their relationship and influence over the United Nations, the World Health Organization, and the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, okay? Got it. Seen all that stuff. My hypothesis is that imagine you are China and you are seeking global hegemony over the United States, seeking that first power status amongst 193 countries throughout the world. What is the fastest way that you can start to dominate without really having much risk? Well, using the levers of elements of national power construct that we teach in national security spheres in the United States here is diplomacy, information, military, and economics. Using those four elements of national power, how would China go about and essentially decreasing American power and influence to their benefit? This goes to your self-mutilation question.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at the economic component of it and the information component of it, why wouldn't China tell the biggest information platforms in America that if you do the following, we will grant you full access to the Chinese market? Mark Zuckerberg, Sergey Brin, I'm talking about the CEOs of Facebook, of CommieTube, Instagarbage, right? Etc. And so why would it be difficult for China? Again, this is a hypothesis. Why wouldn't China say, hey, imagine you're Mark Zuck. Mark, give you access to China in some way, shape, or form, or investments, because we have 1.4 billion consumers that you want to have access to. Name the American company. And we'll provide you access to those consumers under one condition. You unwittingly or even wittingly destroy your country. And this is how you do it. You promote the mutilation of your children. You promote, and oh, by the way, while you do that, you're going to get so much engagement and money off of it, because we'll help you create bots that create this false sense of momentum on subject areas through AI, so that your populace that's actually engaging, that are physical humans, are infuriated, and you have their attention, and you can now sell products, and you can even create a new product line known as mutilation products. And the medicine that has to keep that person stable because they decided to mutilate themselves. Why wouldn't China do that? You tell me. But I'm going to make you billions, Mark. You can keep your kids in private school.
There's a darkness to Mark Zuckerberg's eyes. So
again, this is a
obviously
hypothesis. This is a hypothesis.
Yeah.
And you know my background and experience, so call it uninformed or informed. And guess what? How many people would it take for China to recruit within the United States and our most influential institutions for them to do their bidding? Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, former senator from, California, the former Speaker of the House, California, the former chair of the House Intel Committee from California, and who else? The CEO of Facebook, of CommieTube, whatever they're nowadays. And then what about New York? Speaking of political violence again, what did Chris Cuomo's brother do? Andy, when he was the governor in New York, he compelled the murder of nursing home patients when he locked them in due to the pandemic under his executive unconstitutional orders. How many nursing home patients were elderly that were likely politically right-leaning individuals did he slaughter? That's political violence. That's unacceptable. So Jamie Raskin, I want you to join me along with Speaker Johnson and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer to call on stopping all of this political violence in all of its forms. Do you agree?
I agree.
Who doesn't? It's disgusting.
It's absolutely sick. It makes me sick to my stomach. We saw a unification of the American political parties during COVID. I mean, it was so clear that there was some kind of uniparty happening. And how deep does that go? I mean, I look at Mike Johnson. He started out kind of people would say he was a Christian and he's moral and he's for the good of the people. And yet his actions, it's like, did he turn, or was he always that way?
Great question. I'm glad you asked it. So, again, another hypothesis based on my research. So you got to remember that the U.S. Capitol Police are your security detail that gets to see everything day and night of the leadership of the bicameral legislative branch leaders, speakers, majority leaders, et cetera, right? The minority on both sides, right? And there's a bureau called the, what is that called? There's Protective Services Bureau, and then there's the Dignitary Protective Services, right? So they protect the dignitaries, meaning the senior ranking officials of the House and the Senate. So if you're, hold up, wait for the name. If you're Sean Gallagher, whom most people have never heard of, who's been in that position for quite some time, and now he is the Assistant Chief Capitol Police, would you suspect that he has knowledge of transgressions, if there are any, of senior leaders within the legislative branch, speakers, Senate Majority Leader, etc.? Same thing goes with a certain Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving, who served under John Boehner, Paul Ryan, Nancy Pelosi. If they're with those individuals day in and day out, do they probably know all the intricate details? And if there are transgressions to be had, knows about them. And now that person has leverage, whether it's Sean Gallagher or whether it's Paul Irving, or name the senior level official in the U.S. Capitol Police, for example, the General Counsel, Ted DeBias. Do you think that they would use that leverage to protect themselves and promote what they're trying to do? Would that be a fair thing? So then is that why Sean Gallagher was never charged with a felony for his financial shenanigans that were reported on a while ago? Remember I said earlier in the interview, there's really no mechanism to go after these people internally, right?
That's right.
But they do have the leverage to then go and say, hey, Mike Johnson, yeah, the Sergeant at Arms controls all email systems here on campus that has house.gov and all the IT systems. So, meaning the CCTV footage as well. So if there's a transgression that took place whether in the email systems or on video on the Capitol grounds or in the House, for example, the House Sergeant at Arms probably has access and the ability to access that. And the Speaker of the House probably can get access to that too, because the Sergeant at Arms works for the Speaker. If you're a savvy Speaker of the House, who wasn't just like out of nowhere placed, you're going to know these things and leverage that for votes. So is that why Paul Ryan was the first meeting that Mike Johnson had? Because he was leveraging what he has through his former Sergeant at Arms, Paul Irving. I know it's complicated. I'm talking about different detailed names, but those are some of the members of people that I'm investigating on the list. And my evidence. So that list is really a let's look into these people list. But I had to make a provocative naming sound because that's what I call what the staff director of the January 6th cover-up committee, David Buckley, was the guy that ran the January 6th cover-up committee for Pelosi, Pence, Cheney, and Benny Thompson in the 117th Congress. He was the one that created a target list of patriots that conducted First Amendment, unarmed, peaceful, law-abiding activity. And he was the one that was the catalyst to creating the political violence that was done on Roger Stone, that was done on who else?
Steve
Peter
Bannon.
Navarro And Steve Bannon threw that committee because they voted for contempt, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Staff Director David Buckley, who worked for John Brennan, the CIA director, as the Inspector General. That's maybe why John Brennan's on the list. Again, it's people that have a nexus in relationship to what appears to be clear treason.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are you going to present it to the law enforcement agencies of which I'm investigating for prosecution?
Yes.
I mean, seriously, no. It has to be in the court of public opinion. It's got to be so provocative to get people's attention to then people be like, oh, wait, what I've been saying is needs to be looked at. And that creates the impetus for law enforcement to start to scratch that surface. And the way they are able to get to that next level in evidentiary threshold, when Elon Musk, going back to him, decides that, you know what, right after Labor Day is the perfect time, right after the DNC and the RNC conventions next week, the DNC convention is the last week of August, when everybody comes back from recess in the House, right, Congress, when everybody comes back from summer vacation and starts school, that's when everybody starts to pay attention again. And that's when I think Elon Musk will benefit, not only to support his First Amendment in the interest of public transparency and create engagement that is, I believe, in my opinion, appropriate so that people start to look at X as a platform to increase engagement, viewership, for it to become what he wants it to be, the platform of choice on the planet. If he releases that, the mother of all Twitter files, and it even has a scintilla, a 1% of what I think it has, the entire planet is going to want to go on to X as the platform to start to look at and consume this will make, I think, WikiLeaks look like a speck of dust of what I think is in there, just based on what has already been released through Schellenberger and Taibbi's Twitter files.
Do you think he'll have the balls to do it?
I never bet against Elon Musk.
Okay.
I believe maybe the first time I said it was in 99 or something when he was at 98 at PayPal. Remember that PayPal's first name was X. Did you know that?
No, I didn't.
That's why he had that domain, and that's why he renamed it, the Twitter platform, to X. He still had it, in my opinion, because it was X before Peter Thiel took it over. And as a side note, for those listening in on the other side, yes, Peter Thiel was one of 3 people that Peter Thiel donated to, max personal contribution, when I did attempt to run against the establishment in Virginia, but they decided to block me from appearing on the ballot.
Yeah, I wanted to
unlawfully.
I wanted to ask
and I did
you,
have enough signatures.
Yeah, okay, so you ran for state representative?
U.S. Senate.
U.S. Senate. Okay.
Yeah, so who was running against me was Tim Kaine.
Oh. All right, so you ran as a Republican.
Right.
And they said you will not be able to appear on the ballot because you don't have enough signatures.
The Republican Party of Virginia blocked me from appearing on their ballot.
So what do you make of this establishment
And so
Republican
I sued
thing?
them, and the judge said, well, had you filed your suit a couple days prior, we wouldn't have had this theory called latches, which is the ballots had already started printing for the early voting. And so he's like, oh, we can't get you on the ballot, even though you may have the merits to be on the ballot. Sorry.
Why don't we?
But the reason why I didn't file earlier is because I couldn't wrestle out of the Republican Party of Virginia the ballots that they were claiming or the signatures that they were claiming that were illegitimate. They would not provide them to me. And they provided them literally the day after the ballots started printing.
So,
which was
all of this
disgusting.
We're seeing the same thing kind of happen with Kennedy. Like he didn't get enough signatures and support to appear in the CNN debate, right? And we saw that, and yes, he did.
Elon Musk needs to host a debate.
Yes, he totally does.
No, a conversation.
A conversation's even better. I'm tired of moderators.
Because at this point, the carcass is already done, right?
Okay.
The Dementia Joe.
Yes.
let's not have let's have a discussion, right?
Yeah.
For the interests of America with between
Well,
the remaining
so-
two leading candidates,
So
right?
why are they calling these shots? Why do we have to have this
They're
establishment?
the gatekeepers, and that's why Elon is the most instrumental figure. Elon Musk is the most influential figure in the political conversation in America. I'll just say in America, not only because of his wealth, but more importantly, his reach, his ability to counter anything coming from the combined cabal legacy media. And they don't know what to do with that. They're trying to figure out how to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so, they're kind of attacking him, but they're not, because a lot of these folks that are attacking him, they own a Tesla too, or they have stock or shares. Like they have to decouple themselves from somebody that is about to, hopefully, expose them.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say them, it's all sides of the political spectrum. That list includes people from both political parties.
Absolutely.
So,
We've had
I
Matt.
was going to say all political parties, but it was like both.
Both.
There's only really two. So
We've had Matt Strickland on here, and we've been talking about
great patriot.
Yeah, we've been talking about this uniparty happening, and it's on both sides. And there's never been a time that's been more apparent than during these COVID years, because both sides were acting
people
the
say
same
uniparty and
way.
deep state. It's nebulous, so people aren't like concerned. Like, no, I'm not going to get any accountability because the country's still talking about some nebulous creature.
Mm-hmm.
I try to take that to the next step of like, here's what I've found. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what I suspect, like, this is what I know based on the evidence that I found. This is what I don't know, and this is what I think.
Mm-hmm.
The part where I say what I think, which is my assessment, that's what they're scared of, because they're almost just thinking like, does he have access to our communications? Because he's talking as though, they're responding as though I have access to their communications.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to ever disclose if I do or I don't, okay? But Elon Musk, if you have a question, why don't you ask Elon Musk, okay? A lot of the questions that I'm being asked by these legacy media radicals that are surrogates of Jamie Raskin and Julie Farnham, who was the deputy at U.S. Capitol Police Intel and Interagency Coordination Division, working with Sean Gallagher. I have those folks on the list, and they're the ones responding to that hit piece author, because they're trying to build me into a persona of like, oh, this is pure evil. We not right, and then they have to tie it to their biggest threat, which is who?
Their biggest threat?
Yeah.
Trump.
Exactly. So they have to somehow tie it. There was a couple factual statements in that article where it basically says that basically they're trying to tie me to Trump, but then they say, you know what? Yeah, he's done it separate and parallel. I have never communicated with Donald Trump, candidate Trump, President Trump. I have never directly, or as far as I know, had anyone indirectly communicate. That's pretty broad and specific statement. So my thought process is, I have to do this separate from the system for it to have any sort of credibility.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if it's too harsh for some people, well, maybe you got to work on your courage. If it's not enough for some people, well, sorry, you're getting into the illegal realm. That's not how I play. Okay. If you go anywhere beyond what I'm discussing, you're getting outside of what I want, which is legal, moral, ethical, peaceful, and patriotic. When it has those 5 characteristics, that's all me, baby. Once it goes outside of that, I have nothing to do with that, and I denounce it. And that's why I call on Speaker Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer to join me in going after those folks that did commit political violence. All those involved in the pandemic COVID con. All those that unmasked, well, it wasn't quite political violence, but you can technically say it was. The 39 that unmasked General Flynn, to include Jamie Raskin's wife, Sarah, that resulted in the weaponized targeting and burglary, larceny of General Flynn's son's devices? Yes. They took all of his electronic devices, Michael Flynn Jr. Why is that, Jamie Raskin? Was it due to your wife, Sarah, as being part of that scheme to take down General Flynn? So that list includes those categories of people. And that's why they're asking Jamie Raskin. And that's why he's responding the way he is, trying to come after me. I welcome that.
Who is a person on your list that we as the public would be most shocked to see?
Jared Kushner.
And why is he on there?
Jared Kushner was the shadow governor while Mike Pence ran the White House coronavirus task force. And Jared Kushner was instrumental in deciding who would get what contracts for face toilets, for the ventilators, and for all the PPE products. I wonder what kind of a financial windfall took place in that entire scheme. That's a great question.
Yeah.
What say you? Is he worthy of
Absolutely.
looking into?
Yes, absolutely. You have taken that, the Teddy Roosevelt quote, as he says.
And of course, Mike Pence is on there because of that same.
Of course, you've taken this invisible government and made it visible by giving actual names with it. So thank you for that.
I mean, we'll see what they do with me. But I think at this point, the cat's out of the bag with that hit piece. It does exactly what I intended it to do, which was to shine light on a massive mobilization demand for Elon Musk to look at those on my list that have a Twitter account, to then take a look and see if there's sufficient evidence to prove beyond any doubt what I am assessing to be true. And once that takes place, I think America will address the problem peacefully, patriotically, legally, morally, and ethically.
Absolutely. This is fascinating. Before we close there, I have a couple questions. You are in the Flynn movie, correct?
Yes.
And so what's the most important point that people can take away from that movie?
I'd say 2 points. So the first point is General Flynn was never charged with a crime. He was never charged with a crime. He was coerced into a guilty plea with an unlimited budgeted Mueller investigative team. Some of those members are on that list again, right? That were behind that. He was compelled to own a guilty plea, pulled it back. The charges were dropped. Actually, I shouldn't say charges. He was never charged. The criminal information used to coerce, the fake criminal information that was used to coerce the guilty plea was pulled back by the very Department of Justice when that was exposed. And the judge would not drop the case. And so, the first time in America's history, somebody was never charged where the judge refused to drop a case that the prosecution and the defense team agreed to be dropped. The judge would not. That's the first time ever in American history. And the second thing that occurred in the first time in American history, a president had to do a pardon of innocence because there were no charges, there were no crime. The judge failed to drop it. That's point number one of key takeaway of the movie. And number two, every single thing that people feel, whether it was the mutilation, right? The self-mutilation promotion, whether it's the whole pandemic, every single friction point as it relates to what we've seen over the last decade. The first political target that they tried to conduct, I would say, a political violence on in this arc of history, the first political target by this list was General Flynn. Why? Because he was squeaky clean and knew the system to be able to expose every single person that was involved in the deep state, because he knew that, like, if you think I know the system, it's like 0.0 repeating 1 compared to what he knows about the system. That is why they fear him. And because I've spent thousands of hours of research to get myself maybe to the 1% point now of what he knows, they are now coming after me, because my platform and my reach and my deliberate, on the line First Amendment rhetoric is exposing them. And I will continue to do so day in and day out until we either win or they lose. Those are the two options.
How can we as average American citizens clean up the deep state and combat this corruption?
Expose it. Because, is this the last question?
This is the last question.
This is the solution. And this is complicated, but simple. Everyone knows at this point, over, I would say 90% of the country knows that there was some level of shenaniganry in elections.
Yes.
I can present to you how to, without any 100% guarantee that my plan will stop the retail, wholesale, digital, algorithmic, software, fraud, foreign interference, ballot harvesting, ballot drop box, all of that. Put it aside and actually conduct free and fair elections that everyone knows to be transparent. And this is how it would be done. Let's just say on November 5th, across the end, all the 50 states' capitals, the state legislature convenes the Speaker of the House and the Senate President or Majority Leader. Unless you're in Nebraska, then it's just the Senate, unicameral. So all the legislatures of the states convene and say, you know what? Because of all the illegalities of our systems, we're going to conduct our elections according to Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2 of our U.S. Constitution, just how it was done with the first few presidential elections. We're going to hold a joint session and vote in a live streamed format on who we allocate to be the next, who is going to receive the electoral votes from our state for president and vice president. Can you imagine? America already knows how many members are in each body, who's a registered voter technically there in this situation, who's a registered Republican, who's a registered Democrat, because you know the members.
Yep.
And you C-SPAN live stream that vote. Guess who controls a majority of electoral votes under that framework?
Republicans.
They do.
Yep.
And can you imagine a time where a Republican that is either in on it, maybe even on my list, that is even a coward, do you think that if they're put on public display that they will vote against their party's nominee? What do you think their constituents will do with that member of the House and Senate of that state?
That's real accountability.
They'll probably vote for the nominee. So does that guarantee that the Republican nominee wins the presidency in 2024 under this framework? Does that guarantee all fraud is out the window? It does. Does that guarantee transparency? It does. Does that mean it's a free and fair election? Yes, because it's specifically according to the mandate of Article 2, Section 1, Clause 2, which grants the legislatures of the state the plenary authority to allocate their presidential and vice presidential electors. So if you're concerned about the illegals voting with this conversation going on right now, it circumvents all of that in the most constitutionally viable way that we have. Our founder is brilliant. For such a time as this, we go back to the system, and then maybe the next go around, we then create election laws that guarantee that same level of confidence and transparency. If you don't like it, then you vote your state reps out, state senators.
That's excellent. That's a great solution. It's so simple.
Simple.
Wow. Well, Ivan, this has been really
Peaceful,
wonderful.
patriotic,
Yes.
legal, moral, and ethical.
And
That is
nonviolent.
always what I advocate for.
Yeah.
Always. Without equivocation.
Yeah. Thank you, Ivan.
Thank
this
you
has
for
been
having
wonderful.
me. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for tuning in. Please like, comment, subscribe to, and share our podcasts. Visit our website where you can sign up for our latest newsletters and become a member of Feds for Freedom at fedsforfreedom.org.